Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, despite objections from the EU and dismay from environmental campaigners, Uganda cracks open its plans to cash in on commercial crude. It's begun drilling for oil and plans on constructing the world's longest heated oil pipeline. Also, on International Day of Education, we hear from a leading education chief recently back from a tour of Ethiopian classrooms about what the country can do to restore its learning landscape despite the impact of years of conflict. And Cape Verde signs a pioneering debt for nature swap deal with Portugal. Lisbon agrees that millions owed to it by the archipelago will go into an environmental investment fund to help Cape Verde find solutions to climate emergencies. But first, Uganda's started drilling for oil in the first program of its kind in the country. It's been staking hopes of an economic boost ever since the billions of barrels in crude were discovered at Lake Albert in 2006. But plans for the pipeline have horrified environmental campaigners. Camille Nedlek has more.
New oil fields and a political minefield. Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni launched a drilling campaign at the Chinese-operated Kingfisher oil concession on Tuesday in the Lake Albert area in western Uganda, noted for its biodiversity. Activists and opposition politicians have hit out at what they warn could be an ecological disaster.
We have no institutions that can really check the dangers that any oil industry can bring. And yet we know that the oil of Uganda is in a very delicate environmental area where we have a lot of other public interest, natural environmental assets.
Also in Lake Albert is the Tilenga 1 and 2 projects operated by energy giant Total Energy. All three are expected to be running by 2025. They're set to produce over 200,000 barrels of oil per day, transported by the East African crude oil pipeline, expected to be the longest pipeline in the world. This $10 billion mega project has been plagued by accusations of human rights abuses and was dealt a further blow in September when the European Parliament passed a resolution condemning it. Total Energy denies the allegations.
This project is a major development for Uganda and Tanzania, and we are doing our utmost to ensure that it is exemplary in terms of transparency, shared prosperity, economic and social progress, sustainable development, and protecting the environment and human rights.
Total Energy says the construction phase of the projects will generate nearly 80,000 direct and indirect local jobs.
Cape Verde is one of the highest debt to GDP ratios in Africa. It owes Portugal around 140 million euros, but has just signed an agreement with Lisbon to swap what it owes for environmental and climate investments. Our West Africa correspondent Sam Bradpiece has spoken to an important player in the negotiations to find out why this deal is such a win-win for both parties.
Cape Verde owes some 140 million euros to the Portuguese government and an estimated 400 million euros to Portuguese banks. But under this new deal, the Cape Verdean government will be able to convert at least some of that debt into domestic spending on climate and nature. The benefits for Cape Verde are obvious. It's a small island nation intensely threatened by climate change. But I asked one of the main architects of the deal, what does Portugal get out of this arrangement?
Portugal is hoping that this money may be able to be linked, I'm assuming, to their climate finance targets. All rich countries have to help developing countries with money to mitigate and adapt to climate change. So this could be included against that target. And then it may be that Portugal, also quite a lot of the debt is linked to Portuguese companies. So it may be that they're hoping that Portuguese companies benefit from some of the spending, such as renewable energy companies in Portugal and so on. So it could be beneficial to the Portuguese economy as well.
Cape Verde is in the process of setting up an environmental and climate fund where at least 12 million euros of debt repayments will initially be placed. But the Portuguese Prime Minister has said that eventually the entire debt load would be put into this fund, allowing Cape Verde to get on with the process of energy transition and better tackle the climate crisis.
Now, Tuesday marked the International Day of Education, when extra attention is given to the successes and hurdles faced by those striving for access to learning across the world and specifically across the continent for our purposes. Now, in Ethiopia, hopes for continued improvement in the education sector were rocked by 2 years of conflict that the country is still in the process of emerging from. Prior to that, it had been making pretty good progress. Currently, though, 3.5 million children are out of school, with 1.3 million more at risk of dropping out. The head of the Global Partnership for Education marked the day by visiting schools in the country. Now, I asked her how big an impact the conflict has had on Ethiopia's education system.
Georgia, this is a difficult question to answer because, of course, I mean, we still haven't been able to, see the whole dimensions of the impact of the conflict. But I would say that the conflict combined with COVID and combined with the results of, the food security situation in the country created two main problems. First one, as it happened everywhere in the world, children were kept out of school. And while in more advanced economies, children could somehow replace part of the in-person education with remote learning, obviously this was not possible in cases like Ethiopia. And so has taken children really away from education for quite a long stretch of time. On top of that, the conflict generated enormous internal mobility, so children have been displaced, they are out of school, it's very difficult to re-enroll them in the places where they are. In many cases, they keep moving again and again, so this is a kind of a combined effect that really had made it very difficult for children to remain steadily in school and continue with their education. Then that needs to be compounded with damages on the infrastructure, which has been significant in the war-affected zone. And this is one of the things that we, for example, are discussing with the government, the needs to move very quickly on rebuilding the infrastructure facilities that have been destroyed during the war and making sure that school goes back to normal as quickly as possible. Education is a long-term trajectory, is a marathon really, and so it's important that we don't expect things to change over a 5-year times. Having said that, the government was investing a significant amount of their own resources, supplemented by a significant amount of donors' resources. Because of the combined effect of the economic crisis, the war, and COVID, the amount of national resources going to education has been reduced and is mainly now only covering the payment of salaries for teachers. That obviously is not sufficient. Education, to be really transformed, needs to have investment that are much more significant than that. So I think that there is need for the government, once that the situation has fully normalized, to go back to their original investment at a level that was between 23 and 26% of their national budget. Donors somehow also, need to step up to the plate and continue supporting the sector.
Fragenti, they're the CEO of the Global Partnership for Education, on the reshaping of Ethiopia's education system going forward. Now, Ivory Coast handed out awards to dozens of soldiers in a military ceremony on Tuesday morning in Abidjan. Amongst those being honoured as Knights of the National Order of the Republic were 49 soldiers whose detention by Mali last year triggered a diplomatic spat. Sophie Lamotte has more.
850 soldiers were decorated with different medals of honor on Tuesday for their participation in the UN peacekeeping MINUSMA mission in Mali. The ceremony was larger than usual as authorities delayed holding it until the return of the 49 soldiers who had been detained in Mali for about 6 months. Ivory Coast still has 870 soldiers on the ground in the neighbouring country. They're all due back in February and August, and they will be the last Ivorian soldiers in the MINUSMA mission, at least for the foreseeable future. Along with 13 other countries, Ivory Coast has decided to withdraw from the UN mission in Mali, but authorities say that they're proud of the work that they've achieved so far.
I congratulate you all. This inter-Malian presence continues to the defence of the front and to guaranteeing the security of our borders and help this neighbouring country to reconnect with peace and stability.
Over the last 10 years, roughly 150 Ivorian blue helmets have been killed in the line of duty in Mali. Troops that we heard here today said that the deployment was challenging.
During this mission, we've experienced lots of ups and downs, both in terms of process and duration. In the end, it was 6 to 36 months of constant stress, but permanent determination.
The MINUSMA's presence in Mali has become controversial and uncertain, due notably to tensions with the host country and large withdrawal of troops. The extremist insurgency continues to destabilize the country. Violent attacks are intensifying, and 8.8 million people are expected to be in need of humanitarian assistance in 2023. That's a 17% increase on last year.
Sophie Lamott there for us in Ivory Coast. Now, in Tunisia, indigenous Amazigh people who have been living in North Africa for thousands of years are today just a fraction of the population. Amazigh identity was actively suppressed after Tunisian independence. But in the mountainous south, the culture and language still survive. Our correspondent sent us this report.
In the highlands of Ras El Oued in Tunisia's south, this whitewashed cave house known as a troglodyte dwelling was built by an Amazigh family in the 1940s. Their descendants, Jezia and El Hedi, are a retired couple who still live here.
This key is very old. It dates to 1942 or 1948.
The design of the house, built directly into the mountain, creates natural air conditioning.
When it's cold outside, here it's warm, and when it's hot outside, here it's naturally cool.
Jezia works with wool to create burnous, a traditional warm cape.
I learned to do this when I was young. We buy coats, but this method is better. At least it's 100% wool and keeps you warm. It's an Amazigh tradition to do this all by yourself.
This ancient Amazigh tradition is at risk of disappearing since the couple's children left this traditional way of life behind long ago. They moved on because of a lack of local jobs or infrastructure. Nearby, another village in the mountains lies completely abandoned. Over the years, many families have migrated to cities. We meet Khadija in Tatooine. She still uses age-old techniques to make margoum, patterned rugs traditionally made for Amazigh weddings.
The patterns on the rug come from the tattoos our grandmothers have. The eye protects us from temptation. The fish, this pattern, which represents chastity.
Khadija sells her rugs at fairs and passes on her skills to other women of the family, knowledge about traditional wedding clothes, jewelry, and the Amazigh language which she speaks. This handing down of tradition by family is the only way to preserve a neglected heritage.
In other North African countries like Algeria or Morocco, the Amazigh-speaking community is bigger, so the state recognizes and appreciates the identity. They even teach Amazigh in certain schools. But here we're really a minority, there's no effort.
In recent years, civil society groups and social media have helped raise awareness of Amazigh ways to other Tunisians. Miriam is counting on this visibility to spark a revival of troglodyte houses. She's hoping to restore the site as a tourist attraction.
Well, that's it for Eye in Africa. Thanks for joining us. Do so again. Take care.
Politicians picking their constituents.